Taylor. May these lights be a symbol of our commitment to continue the work of racial justice and to proclaim Black Lives Matter. And now let our choir sing our opening hymn, which is As We Sing of Hope and Joy.
As we sing of hope and joy today, some know only anguish and despair. How can we lift our voices in this way, while some have pain and misery to spare? If a crumbling world we would renew, we must sing no word in every song. Earth's noisy gong will never do. In every breath compassion must be born. Let this song our greatest hope contain, laughter of a well-fed child its love, moves over every heartbeat its refrain, its not many from pieces each tune. Sing of joy while hammering each nail. Sing of hope while pulling every reed. So shall we sing together and prevail. May every hallelujah bear us seed.
Now is the time in our service for joys and sorrows. If you're visiting with us for the first time, this is the time when you can introduce yourself. For those gathering in this room, we invite you to raise your hand and we'll pass you a microphone so that you can share aloud. We ask that you speak into the mic so that people online can hear. For those joining online, we invite you to type into the chat your joys and sorrows, and Mike Stein, our tech person, will read them aloud. Anybody want to share?
Hi, my name is Sally, and I have a joy. Last night, the Staten Island Jazz Festival performed at the St. George Theater. It was wonderful. It was just a wonderful experience. Sajda Mazawier-Ladner, who is the director for many years of the Universal Temple of the Arts, died last year. And her daughter, Rashida Ladner, is carrying it on. And it was just an amazing performance of dance and different original music, jazz standards, and poetry. It was just a beautiful event. It was a joy to be there.
Anybody else like to share? Excellent.
Morning, I'm Sarah Rachel Walters. My joy is I'm so happy to be back here singing in person. And my sorrow is that someone who's part Ukrainian, my heart goes out to people over there, and I'm really in pain, and I feel so awful. So I hope that there will be a resolution soon, and they'll at least have a ceasefire. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Do you have anybody to read in the chat, Mike? For all the joys and sorrows we have heard.
Is that it?
And for all those that go unspoken, we are grateful for sharing them in community. Let us enter into a moment of silence and reflect on the joys and sorrows we have spoken and the ones left unspoken but carried in our hearts this morning. May the joys and the sorrows, may the words and the silence we have shared remind us that no matter our joys or sorrows, we are not alone. May it be so. Today's reading is Waging Peace by Thich Nhat Hanh. If the earth were your body, you would be able to feel the many areas where it is suffering. War, political and economic oppression, famine, and pollution wreak havoc in so many places. Every day, children are going blind from malnutrition, their hands searching hopelessly through mounds of trash for a few ounces of food. Adults are dying slowly in prisons for trying to oppose violence. Rivers are dying and the air is becoming more and more difficult to breathe. The two great superpowers have enough nuclear weapons to destroy the earth dozens of times. Many people are aware of the world's suffering. Their hearts are filled with compassion. They know what needs to be done, and they engage in political, social, and environmental work to try to change things. But after a period of intense involvement, they may become discouraged if they lack the strength needed to sustain a life of action. Real strength is not in power, money, or weapons, but in deep inner peace. Practicing mindfulness in each moment of our daily lives, we can cultivate our own peace. With clarity, determination, and patience, the fruits of meditation, we can sustain a life of action and be real instruments of peace. I have seen this peace in people of various religions and cultural backgrounds who spend their time and energy protecting the weak, struggling for social justice, lessening the disparity between rich and poor, stopping the arms race, fighting against discrimination, and watering the trees of love and understanding throughout the world. It's now time to introduce our speaker. Our speaker for today is Dr. Regina Cassidy. Dr. Cassidy is a teacher, a social worker, and a chaplain who earned a doctor of ministry from New York Theological Seminary. She preaches at Olivet Presbyterian and Castleton Hill Moravian Church, as well as Prince Bay Reformed Church. Before the pandemic, she served as chaplain with the homeless and marginally housed at Church of the Village in Manhattan. We are grateful to have you speak with us today, Dr. Cassidy.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. As I begin, I'd like to share with you a few things. First, I selected the opening words because of one of the first times I visited here before. It was to see and to listen to Daniel Berrigan. I'm not quite sure when it was. It may have been after 9/11 or to do with the conflicts in Afghanistan or Iran or Iraq. It was wonderful, reassuring, and challenging to hear him talk. I had long known of him as a political activist, as an advocate for nonviolence and nonviolent resistance. I had admired him from afar until that day when I had a chance to actually hear him speak, shake his hand, and even to have a little chat with him afterwards. I wanted direction, and I desperately sought answers from him. Secondly, I appreciate coming here today to speak with you. It was a real privilege and an unexpected opportunity when Pastor Emily called me to explore a topic that has been weighing on my mind and on my heart with you, like-minded people. And I can hear already, and I'm sure it's weighing on all your minds and hearts right now too, the war in Ukraine. I want directions now, and I seek answers now. And right from the onset, I'd like to tell you that, in full disclosure, I don't have any answers, and I don't have a clear direction. And thirdly, preparing for today's service has been one of the most difficult services I've ever prepared for. Trying to pick the readings for today was the hardest part of all. Resources were right at hand, readily at home for a long, long time, but they eluded me. Let me explain if I can. First, I need to talk about my refrigerator, as well as my best friend, Dorothy. That's an odd combination, you'd be right to say. Well, Dorothy and I have met over 50 years ago, but our friendship solidified in the early 70s, where we met amazing and liberal teachers, all in our Catholic high school. We had just come through the tumultuous 60s, which we really hadn't understood all that well at all. But now in high school, we've fully learned about events like the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights protest, and we even celebrated the first Earth Day on the beachfront at our school. However, most importantly, we learned about people together. People whose lives have changed and shaped my life to this very day. Who were these people? Martin Luther King, Dorothy Day, and Mahatma Gandhi. Well, just as my friend Dorothy has remained my best friend to this day, and coincidentally, she stayed overnight at our home last night, these three people have stayed with me as well. And that's where my refrigerator comes in. Sometime during our ensuing years together, as we started our adult lives, Dorothy gave me 3 small magnet icons of each of my heroes, and they've been on my refrigerator door since then. These magnets I've enlarged here for you to see. One, Mahatma Gandhi. The second, Dorothy Day. And the third, Martin Luther King. And as a result to this very day, it doesn't take much effort on my part to be reminded of my heroes. It doesn't take much effort to be reminded of my ideals. You know their stories. Each exemplified lives of peace. They led by their examples. They achieved major victories without harming any other person, and 2 actually died in the process. The third, Dorothy Day, lived a simple life that she taught. I am blessed to have actually met her also in a local school where I went to hear her speak at St. Charles in Oakwood. My dad and I rushed into the building, I remember, trying to get there on time, when all of a sudden we ran into a tiny little woman being led into the speech. It turns out we walked alongside Dorothy Day as we went into the auditorium. She spoke to us softly as we walked, and it's a moment I'll never forget. So these 2 people I've met on Staten Island, Daniel Berrigan and Dorothy Day, and they both did live their lives, as did Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi. They lived with their ideals of pacifism and nonviolence. So with all these powerful influences and encounters, where does that leave me? Well, I mentioned earlier that it was extremely hard to pick readings for today's service. Very, very hard. When I told one of my 3 sons about my struggle, he said, "Why? Just look in the bookcase. All their writings are right there, next to where you sit every morning." But he was wrong. They are right next to me where I sit. But it was not easy at all. Why? Because back in high school in 1972, everything seemed so clear and so obvious to me. I was 16. So of course, these 3 heroes had all the answers. My teachers had all the answers. I had all the answers, therefore. I knew how to live. I knew what I was going to do. I would love my enemy. I would never hurt anyone. I would never kill anyone. Nonviolent protest, pacifism, the consistent life ethic. Well, yes, of course, to each one of these. Harm no one. Love everyone. That's it. That's how I would live my life. However, when I ran this by my friend Dorothy, she said recently, "Don't even try to apply this to what's happening in Ukraine." She said it. Don't even try applying what we learned in the 60s and the 70s. Was she right? Well, I'm not 16 anymore. I'm 66. And sure, I've seen lots of conflicts, wars, terrorism, as we all have. My father served in the Pacific in World War II. My mother worked in a war plant in Brooklyn. But I have to admit, I've remained over the years pretty naive and very idealistic. Why? I don't know. And don't ask me to explain right now. Maybe that's better for a psychiatrist's bench. But right now, right this moment, I'm faced with the situation in Ukraine. And something has changed in me. Something is changing in me. Why indeed was it so hard for me to pick out these readings? A good question. I did dig out all those old books that my son mentioned. I read all those familiar, beloved words from my heroes. I felt stirred up again, all stirred up and totally frustrated. I struggled. And as I struggled, I realized that these 3 pivotal people shaped my ideals and my idealism in 1972. But now, in 2022, how could I make these ideas real? And I'll tell you the real reason why I printed up those pictures of the icon magnets from my refrigerator. Because even though all three have been on my refrigerator for many, many years, I could actually only find two as I prepared to come here today. Why? Because now I'm a mother of three sons in their 30s, and now I'm a grandma of three little ones, ages 3 and younger. And during the course of time, I've lost one of the magnets. Actually, I believe my magnet is unreachable. It's under the refrigerator in the kitchen. Is that telling me something? Are my ideals unreachable now, too? Recently, I've seen many different images on TV, or read stories in the paper, or heard interviews on the radio. I'm sure you have your own to share about what's happening in Ukraine. Some of those that have stayed with me in particular are as follows. Regular Ukrainians making Molotov cocktails. Regular people, just like me. A Ukrainian couple who bought guns saying that they were going to go on Google to learn how to shoot them. A regular couple, just like my husband there and myself. People protecting their children, their little grandchildren, fleeing, but having to leave their men behind. I'd have to leave almost everyone in my family behind. My sons, my husband, if they were old enough, my grandchildren, almost all boys. And the masses of Russian protesters, well, that really stopped me in my tracks. How do we kill an enemy that isn't really an enemy? Russian people, just like me, who don't even want this war themselves. On the news, I saw an encounter between a Ukrainian woman who held national symbolic seeds in her hand, yelling at a Russian soldier. While she cursed him and yelled at him in his face, saying, "Take these seeds, I hope you die with them in your pocket." The Russian soldiers stayed stoic and calm, saying, "Please, let's not escalate the situation. Please, stay calm." I admired that calm that he showed. I don't blame her, but I do admire his reaction. Does he really even want to be there? There are other images. Ukrainian women sharing their phones with Russian prisoners so they could call their mothers, their parents at home. Ukrainian people giving food and water to the Russian soldiers. Ukrainian refugees being welcomed into the homes of people in neighboring countries, given temporary shelter from freezing temperatures. When I heard and saw these things, I felt a shock. This could be me, called to do these things. Protect my husband, my children, my grandchildren, of course. As I said, I only have sons. How could I leave them? My little ones, well, of course I'd do whatever it took to save them. I'd make Molotov cocktails too. I'd Google how to shoot a gun. At least I think I would. Because I am shocked at how I feel such tremendous anger and rage. So what does this say about me? I could do these things. I could learn to make bombs. I could learn to shoot. I could do these things. I would do these things. I would do these things? Me, the Dorothy Day, Daniel Berrigan, Martin Luther King, Gandhi lover? Me, the idealist? My ideals are only good enough until they need to become real. My ideals are good only until they are tested. Excuse me. In a recent issue of Sojourners magazine, author and peace activist Adam Russell Taylor makes several points. First, he condemned the Russian attack on Ukraine. Then he, quote, called for the de-escalation of violence, asserting that war and violence are never the answer. Even as we recognize that Putin must be held accountable for his aggression through non-military means. Now is the time to renew our commitment to nonviolence and peacemaking, not abandon them for a militaristic path that risks further catastrophic escalation. Now is the time to amplify our prayers and translate them into courageous action, to wage peace. To wage peace. I agree with Taylor. The Russian attack must be condemned. The action of Putin and his followers must be condemned. Please do not misunderstand my qualms or my self-questioning. I am in no way judging Ukrainians for their actions. I'm actually agreeing with their actions. But right now, this is a personal thing. I'm questioning myself. If I agree with Taylor, and I do, if I agree that violence only begets more violence, then what would I do in their situation? Is there something else I could do? Now, please remember what I said at the onset today. I came to you to learn. I come to you with no answers. That's why today is an opportunity for me to learn from you. Now is your turn. Remember, Emily said today would be a dialogue sermon. I'm asking you, and I'm asking seriously, if you could please share with me any of your own thoughts, your own concerns, and your own dilemmas, and maybe some of your own answers. Some questions to start, maybe. If you were Ukrainian, how would you be feeling right now? What would you be doing right now? If you are Russian, how might you be feeling right now? What might you be doing? And finally, as Americans right now, how are we feeling? And what should we be doing? What are we doing? But even if we bombed Russia, we know that many, if not most, of the Russians we'd be bombing don't even believe in Putin, don't even agree with him. So I put it to you, what are your questions? What are your answers? Do you have a direction? Do you have any answers? And now may I put it to you? Would anybody like to, I could either walk around, I think, with the mic, or I could take it from where you're sitting, but I hope somebody has a thought for me. Oh, good. Do you want to walk, or you want? I see a hand over here.
It's up to you.
If you don't mind, since you have, if you don't mind walking, that's great.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
It is a overwhelming question because of the nuclear risk involved. It's an overwhelming question. As a nuclear power, the United States being a nuclear power and Russia being a nuclear power. Generally, if you're a nuclear power, nobody's going to bomb you. And if you're not, you're going to get bombed, basically. I mean, that's true for the world over. I have a lot of thoughts about this, just like everybody else. I've been seeing the news and find it really tragic what's going on. This has happened before, but not to majority white people. So now our attention is on it, I think, in large part because they're white and our media is mostly white. Not that white people should be bombed. I don't agree with that. But I'm just saying our attention is interesting now that they're mostly white people. Another thing is that what it made me think of is that there's a belief in fighting for rights of Black people in this country that nonviolence is not the only way, and that really the only way that the white terrorism of the South was put in check was by war, by the dominance of the Northern forces. And part of me believes that. I mean, nobody has stopped Putin. We've worked with him. We've gotten money from him, not just, Donald Trump and the GOP, but basically across the board, American businesses. We went to Sochi, the Olympics, and so I think that we have a part in propping up Putin and empowering him and making him seem, like a normal leader, which he obviously isn't. Super repressive, very propagandistic media in his country, and obviously suppression of protest, which we're seeing on the TV. I generally don't believe in violence. I believe in the concept, eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. I don't think violence is a solution. If you resort to violence, obviously you've run out of problem-solving ideas. That's my general feeling. So what I think we should do is the United States should not get involved, our military should not get involved in any way, because I think that's a direct confrontation, nuclear power to nuclear power. No good, because that is the death of the world, and we don't want that. Our efforts should be in de-escalation, supporting peace talks and negotiation, and that may result in something that maybe the Ukrainian people don't want, which is giving up part of their territory. So, there's territorial sovereignty is damaged by giving up some parts of their territory, which they did in 2014 anyway. So is that possible? Is that a way to peace? I think we should be supporting the Ukraine defenses. We can't get involved directly because, again, the nuclear threat. But I think we should be helping them defend themselves. And I think actually that the Biden administration is doing the right thing in stating clearly that we are not going to get involved military. I think it's really important to convey that to the world so it's very clear that that's not going to happen. I read a great article in the New Yorker, interview with Kotkin, who is a Russia specialist, and I encourage everybody to read it. If we get involved, then Putin is going to say, see, the West wanted to attack us, so we're going to launch those missiles. As an individual, we're touched by, I'm sorry I'm talking so long. I'm talking almost as long as you.
Well, I'm glad.
I
want this feedback.
A lot of stuff has been on my mind about this, of course, just like everybody else. For an individual, I think the Ukrainian people should defend themselves, and I think we should support that, just because they're facing an army that's like 20 times their size. We shouldn't be involved militarily. Personally, I'm in the same boat as you. I believe in peace. I believe in nonviolence. But if people were, marching up Richmond Terrace with tanks and stuff, what would I do? Would I, pray or meditate, or would I say, I have to flee, or I'm going to support the war efforts to defend my family and my home, you know? So I think being in ambiguity is something that cannot be solved. I think we just have to be there, you know? Because we feel for the situation, but we're not in it. But I suspect that if we were confronted with that, you know, maybe we would be peacefully protesting like people in Russia, or maybe we would be looking for guns too. So it's a wonderful topic to explore and help understand. So thank you very much for that. And I don't have any answers either.
Oh, well, thank you for trying, and you brought up some interesting points that I hadn't even mentioned. Thank you.
Is anybody else here?
Did I see a hand
wants
here?
to speak?
I understand the quandary that people are expressing, and I share much of that. The other thing that has occurred to me as this was developing and now unfolding is how inadequate the conversation is in this country in terms of what the history of the last 30 years in particular has been that has led to this point. In this country, we often forget what happened 2 years ago, much less 30 years ago. And what occurred after the dissolution of the Soviet Union was an explicit promise by NATO and the West I think George W. Bush the first. And they have, at that time, during the 90s, there was testimony in Congress by diplomats who had been ambassadors to Russia that doing such would jeopardize a Russian response. And here we are. I think it's important to be aware of that history and understand its context.
Thank you very much. And having the discussions are important, you're right.
Yeah, I think that what people are saying is, you know, where we're all at, I think it is important, the context. And I think that, you know, I think it's very hard to be a pacifist, a really true pacifist. George Hauser, I learned about him, was a pacifist who refused to fight in World War II. He was in seminary school, and he was very young at that point, and he and a group of people refused to be drafted. They refused. They went down and they refused, and they were jailed for it. They were in a privileged class and were eventually let out at some point. They were in a privileged class, but he ended up being part of the many different peace groups, and in one of the founders of CORE, the Congress for Racial Equality, and he continued, you know, in his own pacifist feeling. But during the African liberation movement in the 50s and 60s, he ended up going to Africa and bringing you know, information back to the United States, trying to bring people to the United States to explain why the people were rising up against colonialism. And he always had to like juggle this conflict between his own pacifism and the people who were fighting for their liberty, and this stayed with him, you know, through his whole life. But he did understand the need to defend your liberty and freedom. So I think about him a little bit. You know, even if you're a pacifist, you're still going to have all kinds of contradictions. And it's not always easy. You know, he never picked up a gun himself. He was kind of worried that he, you know, was putting himself in certain situations. but he always went to Africa, and he became very close to many of the African liberation fighters. So I think you can hold to totally conflicting thoughts in your head sometimes, when you have to, and really respect people's ability. You have a right to defend yourself. I think that's important to acknowledge. And I think we also have a lot of ignorance in our country about why we're complicit. We're complicit in this war, just as the Russians are complicit. And we are, because we set the stage for this. We didn't, we put a lot of red lines, and our country is just as responsible for this as the Russians are. So, we need to talk about, you've got to talk, you've got to de-escalate, because it's going, I think that the Russians are going to eventually, it's going to be messy, but they're going to be successful because they have the power, military power. They're going to be successful and lay waste to Ukraine. So it's eventually going to be some kind of, if the Ukrainians can't have it, or the West can't have it, nobody can have it. So, that's their position, basically, because we didn't want Cuba to have nuclear weapons stationed on it. They're 90 miles from Miami, and they don't want nuclear weapons stationed in Ukraine right on their border. So there needs to be in my opinion, they need to face up to the fact that this whole nuclear weapons regime is wrong, and they need to start negotiating and getting rid of the nuclear weapons, and they need to really talk about, what is common security in that region. So our voices, I'm so amazed at the people who are all over Russia and risking their lives, their livelihood, protesting. We protested our country in 2002, 2003. Some of us were arrested, but we didn't lose our lives or livelihood. We're still here. We're not in a gulag somewhere, but would we do that? If we were in Russia right now, would we be out on the streets right now? Now we don't see too many Americans out on the street calling for peace. We don't see that. So I think maybe people are confused. But I think that's our role, call for de-escalation, like you said, and what you said.
Thank you. Thank you very much for bringing our attention to that gentleman you mentioned.
If anybody online wants to say anything or write in the chat, please do that.
I'll make this short. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really wonderful.
Thank you.
There's a lot to be thought about. We think about it in the Bible, about the story of Solomon and the two women who claimed to be the mothers of a child, and one wanted to cut it in half, and the other was ready to walk away and give up the child. Well, that's where I think needs to happen over in Ukraine. There can only be a negotiated settlement. Ukraine needs to sign an agreement. They will never join NATO. I'm against NATO anyway. And also that they have to walk away from the Donbass region and Crimea and give it up to Russia. If it will save the child, do it. That's all I can say.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Anyone else here? Was there anyone online? Shall we continue? Okay, well, thank you all for participating. That was wonderful. You've given me a lot to think about. And just to conclude, a couple of words. I just to say that I don't like the way I'm feeling right now. I don't like the way I feel about what I think I might do. I don't like the conflict between my idealism and my realism. I don't like to acknowledge what I'm pretty sure I would do if I was in Ukraine right now. So what have I come up with so far to deal with this conflict that I feel this being torn? Something popped into my head the other day, probably a phrase you've heard before. Just try to do the next right thing just for today. You know, that's a day-by-day thing. What's the next right thing for me to do today? And finally, what I always go back to at times like this is the Serenity Prayer by Reinhold Niebuhr. And I was looking it up again the other day, and it said that, you know, it was written in the 30s, probably much at a time like this, right before World War II intensified. And his words originally were, "Give us courage to change what must be altered, serenity to accept what cannot be helped, and insight to know one from the other." I hope that we will be able to know each of these for ourselves and proceed with the courage of our convictions. And may it be so. Thank you.
Now is the time in our order of service where we take an offering. We know it is the gifts of all of us that help support our ability to thrive and gather. For those here in this room, we invite you to drop your offering into a basket on the left of the stage as you exit the parish hall after service. For those online, links and instructions will be posted in the chat. You can mail us a check or donate to our PayPal giving page. Please give as generously as you can. Our offering will now be gratefully received. Our musical offertory is Instrument of Peace by Greg Gilpin.
Where there is hatred, let me so love. Where there is injury, let there be pardon. Where there is doubt, let there be faith. Let me be an instrument of peace. Let there be, let there be, let there be an instrument of peace. Let me be, let me be, let me be an instrument of peace. Where there is anguish, let there be hope. Where there is darkness, let there be light. Where there is sadness, let there be joy. Let me be an instrument of peace. Let me be, let me be, let me be an instrument of peace. Let me be, let me be, let me be an instrument of peace. May I not so much seek to be consoled console, to be understood, and to understand, to be loved as to love. We receive, giving we receive, let me be, let me be, let me be an instrument of peace. Let me be, let me be an instrument of peace. Let me be, let me be, let me be an instrument of peace. An instrument of peace. An instrument of peace.
Thank you. That was lovely. And now let our choir sing our closing hymn. This is my song.
This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and wide. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too, and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, thou God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine.
I invite you to join me in extinguishing our chalice. Please repeat after me as I say it. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth,
But not the light of truth,
the warmth of community,
the warmth of community,
or the fire of commitment.
or the fire of commitment.
For these we carry in our hearts
For these we carry in our hearts
until we are together again.
until we are together again.
And the closing words are from Dorothy Day. You could spend your time agonizing or organizing. People say, what is the sense of our small effort? They cannot see that we must lay one brick at a time, take one step at a time. A pebble cast into a pond causes ripples that spreads in all directions. Each one of our thoughts, words, and deeds is like that. No one has a right to sit down and feel hopeless. There is too much work to do. Don't worry about being effective. Just concentrate on being faithful to the truth. I don't have all the answers to solve everything. Be faithful today.
Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to reign with God our Creator. Neighbors all are we. Let us walk with each other in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my solemn vow. To take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me.
Thank you.